Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Handford, and my wife, Dennae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. On the podcast with us today is Rick Smith. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, Rick, I want you to get us started and talk to us a little bit about your background and kind of briefly introduce yourself and tell us where your current focus is right now as an entrepreneur.
So basically, my focus is on trying to make the bullet obsolete. So I just published a book called The End of Killing that is my manifesto for how we're going to do it. Now, let me wind back from that introduction and give you a little bit of history. In 1993, I was living in Belgium when two of my high school friends were shot and killed back in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the parking lot of a golf resort. It involved my two friends who were playing college football at the time and a businessman who had a gun in the glove box and a temper, and the situation spun out of control. And 3 lives were ruined that night. My two friends are dead, and this other guy is now spending his life in jail. And, anytime these tragedies happen, people get upset and angry about it, and you want to do something about it. And for me, there's plenty of angst and divisiveness over the gun control issue. And what struck me is, our government is not really the place to solve this. The place to solve this is through entrepreneurship. If we had Captain Kirk's phaser from Star Trek, nobody would shoot bullets at people anymore, was sort of the simple insight. And that led me to finding actually a NASA scientist who'd been working in this space for over 20 years already, back in the early 90s. And we joined up when I was 23 and he was 73 with the idea of how we could make alternatives that would eventually even surpass the stopping power of a handgun so people could protect themselves but not have to take another's life in the process.
Well, I want you to kind of get it started, and because it sounds to me like you definitely have gone through quite a bit, in your entrepreneurial journey. I like to get started with what I call the sore thumb tough decision. So along this journey, you've made a tough decision and it didn't go so well. But when we talk about it, you're probably thinking of it right now of something that kind of went south, that you had made a decision, you realized kind of looking back that it wasn't the right decision. However, you're glad you went through it because you learned a lot of things throughout it. So we'd like for you to share that with us and then also share some of the lessons that you learned.
Yeah, well, you don't learn as much from success as you do from failure, for sure. I would say our first big mistake was trying to take shortcuts to make money. And what I mean by that, so we started this business with the idea of creating effective, non-lethal weapons that could be, again, an alternative to killing people. Our first product launched, and it was hard. It wasn't scaling. There just wasn't as much demand for it as we had hoped there would be. And we had some early inclinations that there was actually an issue with the product, that it wasn't as effective as it needed to be. I won't go into the details there, but so we're struggling to sell these TASER weapons. We're finding consumers are skeptical about them, and we had a couple demos where they didn't appear to be as effective as they needed to be. Then basically we were at a trade show, and a bunch of consumers kept asking us if we could modify our technology to basically create like a car security system that would shock somebody if they tried to break into your car. So as a bit of a publicity stunt, we mocked one up and went to the Consumer Electronics Show. We're basically thinking, hey, this core thing we're doing is really hard. Boy, the automotive security industry is pretty big. Let's just run a quick test and see if we might be able to create a product that scales and makes more money there. So we created what we called the Auto Taser. That's just what it sounds like. It was a steering wheel lock, like the Club, if you remember that from the 90s, except ours, if you tried to remove it and you didn't have the remote control, it would shock you. And when we went to the Consumer Electronics Show, we had the most unbelievably positive reaction to that product. We were on Good Morning America, the front page of the Las Vegas newspaper. This is during CES, right? The year they launched DVD. And we had a bigger photo in the papers that day. We had a crowd, 20 people deep in our booth. There was so much excitement about the product. So we pivoted our whole business and we sort of put the TASER weapon development on hold to go do this automotive security thing. And we kept running the numbers, there's 100,000 automotive shops and aftermarket retailers across the country. And if we only sell one per month per store, boy, we're going to be rich. And we'll have a real business on our hands. And we spent the next 2 years chasing that product. And when we finally got it to market, we went through about 6 months where we launched it and we got tons of publicity, but nobody was buying it. And I remember talking to Pep Boys store managers. Now, Pep Boys was one of our launch partners. And the store managers were incredibly pumped. They're like, we've never seen a product like this. People are bringing their friends in to see it. That never happens. We're Pep Boys. But they're bringing their friends in to see these new products we've got. And I would then respond, okay, that's great. Is anybody buying them? Oh, no, nobody's buying it. But it's great. It's bringing a ton of traffic into the store. And I remember my dad, who was one of my mentors and advisors, came into the office one day and he called me into a conference room and he had this, the blood had rushed out of his face. And he said, Rick, like, this thing's a disaster. We got to shut it down. And the minute he said it, I knew it was true. At that point, we had burned through all the cash we had left. I did not think the company was going to make it. And my recommendation was that we shut the whole company down. Problem was that my father and his best friend had guaranteed our letter of credit at the bank. And so if the company went under, it was going to wipe out my parents. So we couldn't shut the company down. And ultimately, he put the last of his savings in and convinced our other investor to do the same. And we had one shot to save the company. And what we did was we pivoted back to what we had set out to do. And we had to solve the problems with the first generation TASER, namely that it wasn't working the way it was supposed to. It wasn't effective enough. And we had to go solve the hard engineering problems there, which we did. And then when we launched that product, that's when the company took off. So I think the main message I learned is don't look for the easy way out. There are no quick fixes, and do not do anything to try to make a quick buck. It never turns out well, in my opinion. You need to focus on solving important problems, and important problems are hard to solve, but those are the ones customers will pay you for. And sort of, if it looks like it's going to be a quick buck, you should be very skeptical, because what we learned in this case was the product we built was kind of a freak show product. It was so different and newsworthy. The media loved it, but it actually was not a practical product that people would buy. So also I learned, don't fall in love with, when you get a lot of attention in the media, that has very little correlation to whether or not you've actually built a successful product. Only sales numbers will tell you that.
As entrepreneurs and business owners, how do you balance our kind of tendencies of, that fire, ready, aim mentality versus trying to take a step back, like you're suggesting, to be able to kind of, do things, in a certain sequence so that you don't make that kind of a mistake?
Oh, man, that's a tough one, because now I'm running a company with 1,300 people. And now I spend most of my days fighting the opposite problem, which is that there's too many decision makers, things take far too long, and that can be just as lethal. And especially when you're a startup, you have to be able and ready to pivot. So for me, I think it was less about the speed of the decision, because I tend to believe you have to make fast decisions. And in our case, I think it was just taking our eye off of what really mattered. And in this case, just looking for the quick fix. And look, none of us were super passionate about car security. That wasn't what we'd gotten out of bed, the problem to solve. It was trying to jump quickly at the easy road when the answers were kind of staring us in the face of what we had to do. We had to fix the core problems with the product that we had and not try and run to, an escape hatch to find some other quick, easy fix. But I still think when you're a startup, I would still err towards the side of moving quickly. I guess the question is one. In this case, what burned us was it ended up being a 2-year commit and very capital intensive. And I don't think we understood the magnitude of the bet we were making when we made the bet. So I would have said, just having done like a 1 or 2 hour what could go wrong kind of exercise would have been time well spent. So I think it's more about just the rigor of assessing when you're going to make a pivot, but rigor doesn't mean it's got to take a long time.
So let's shift here a little bit and talk about a different tough decision that you've had to make as an entrepreneur that had a really good and positive outcome, and some of those lessons.
Well, let's see. So here's a different one, which was, so we finally got the TASER right in the late 90s. And once we fixed the effectiveness, it went from being marginally effective to the most effective non-lethal weapon that's ever been out. And when we fixed the core problem, That's when it took off. We didn't have any money for marketing, sales. We literally just sent a former Marine around the country in a Winnebago doing demonstrations. And when we got the product right, it didn't matter that we didn't have, money and resources for a big splashy launch. Over the next 4 years, the company scaled like crazy. We grew 30-fold, I think about 32-fold in sales in 3 or 4 years. We actually grew so fast. The next problem we had was out of nowhere, police everywhere had taser weapons. And, 4 years ago, they didn't exist. And so we got hit with a huge media storm of controversy about, wait a minute, what's going on with police with these new electrical weapons? Are they abusing people, et cetera? And for us, the big pivot that happened was we basically were at a crossroads of, do we try to find ways to deploy our taser technology in other markets? And in fact, we did some experiments like building a military-focused taser and a couple other products that were very technology-centric. And those really weren't working. That it turned out creating new markets based on our technology was not a winning strategy. So we paused, and then we realized, well, what about our existing customers? What other problems did they have that we could solve? And in fact, we knew there was a really big problem, and that was they had to be able to defend themselves when they used a taser because there was all this negative news media. They were getting sued. We were getting sued. There were these negative news stories. And so we pivoted and we said, well, what we should do is we should solve that problem by building cameras that officers can wear that will record what they're doing. And if there's a bad officer, we can hold them accountable, or the agency can. And if the officers are doing the right thing, they can release the video and it will defend their actions. And then once we got started down the camera space, we also realized, wow, this isn't really a hardware problem. There's going to be billions and billions of bytes of data coming off of these cameras. There's going to be a really big software problem. So we ultimately made the decision to pivot the entire company to follow the needs of our customer rather than follow our internal engineering and technology roadmap. And so as I sit here today, now that decision was also really hard because we had to reinvent the entire company from the ground up. The way we sold, learning how to develop software, your whole expense structure, everything changes pretty dramatically. But by continuing to focus on our customer rather than internally on our own technology, we found it was a much more successful strategy, and it expanded our base where we're now much more diversified, where our software and camera business is actually larger on a go-forward basis than the taser weapon business. And so for me, that was a really important lesson about being customer-centric and customer-driven, as opposed to driven by your internal sort of capabilities.
So speaking of strategy here, share with us some strategies that you like to do when you are facing one of these types of tough decisions.
Well, I'd sort of break this down into two. So on a personal level, we've been through some hellaciously hard times. Like in 98, I literally could not see how the company was going to survive. And there were some pretty rough moments where I just was convinced we weren't going to make it. So one thing that helped me was to sort of take a step back and reframe the situation. And I tend to take this life philosophy that I think life is a story. We're living a story. How interesting or uninteresting depends on some of the risks you take. And so in this case, when we were on the brink and it looked like we weren't going to make it, rather than sort of getting depressed and focusing on the negative, I was able to kind of take a step back and look at it and say, you know what? There's no way we should make it out of this. But if we do, my God, that's going to be amazing. Like things can only get better from here. And reframing that, all of those problems as an opportunity for greatness and sort of the pivot point in our corporate story just brought a lot of like energy to the moment. And I think it empowered us to take more risks than you normally would. You'll do your best work when you're under intense pressure because you'll take risks you wouldn't normally take. When things are going great, you would never make the sorts of pivots that you will when you're under really deep stress. And frankly, that's what happened again in 2005. After 4 years of great success, we had tremendous, the whole company was at risk again because there was so much negative news media. We had a federal government investigation into the safety of our products, and we had lawsuits coming in like crazy. 2005 was another one of those moments where, are we going to survive this? And that's when we made this radical pivot to basically get into the camera and software business, which I don't think we ever would have done that if the TASER business was just humming along, doing well. So I tend to look at this anytime one of these really catastrophic or challenging events happen. Now I tend to take a step back and say, okay, it's always darkest right before the dawn. The time to be scared is when everything's going great, you're on top of the world, and then sort of only bad things can happen, right? The sun doesn't shine every day. If you have a really long run of good stuff, then I get nervous. Okay, where's the bad news coming from? But when you've been just buffeted by crisis and challenge and things are going wrong, I've actually found that's the time you can take a step back and say, you know what? Can't get much worse. And in those moments, you can get away with making the crazy changes. Like our organization probably never would have gone through all the changes required for us to pivot the business if things were going well. But people really do come together and they'll accept radical changes when you're in the middle of a crisis.
So we're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to be going through a series of quick questions and answers that we call the trifecta. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com. And we are back, and we're going through a series of quick questions and answers now called the trifecta. And I want you to get us started and talk to us about your favorite technology that you use in business that helps make your life easier every day.
Yeah. So for me, actually, I use a voice communication app called Voxer that for me is a huge productivity lift. So I basically don't take phone calls unless I'm expecting a call from a big customer. I have the ringer on my phone off. I leave my phone permanently in do not disturb. So I think as you probably realize, like most folks, if you have your alerts on your phone, it is just buzzing at you all day long. And it becomes almost impossible to get any deep thinking done or any focus work because you're just constantly getting interrupted. And so for me, I've turned all of those off. And one of the things that's enabled me to do that is, so I use this voice communication app called Voxer. You can think of it as a bit like a push-to-talk, walkie-talkie app, but where I can have conversations that behave more like text messages, right? I can get to them when I get to them. I can queue them up for a while if I'm focused on something else, listen to them. And what I've found as well is by having people send short voice messages, you tend to get rid of all the fluff. You know, when you call somebody, number one, it disrupts both your schedules. You both have to stop what you're doing. There's the, hey, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? You should get a couple minutes of pleasantries. Whereas once we got into a cadence, particularly with all the people on my team of sending these voice messages back and forth, it tends to cut out a lot of the disruption and it streamlines the efficiency. And then the last piece that I really like about that app is you can play back messages at up to 4 times the real speed. So we do my management meeting once a week. And we used to start the meeting by having everybody go around the table and do an update. Well, guess what? In a 60-minute meeting, if you have 10 people in the room, you're well over halfway through the meeting by the time people get done talking. So we actually completely eliminated that. And on Sunday nights, everybody goes on and they share their update in the Voxer app. And what that allows us to do, number one, people are more concise because it's kind of awkward when you're sitting there just talking to your phone by yourself. You tend to drone on less. They tend to organize their thoughts a little better. And then you can listen to everybody else's feedback. I typically listen at 3 times real speed. So I can listen to 20 minutes of updates in about 6.5 minutes. So for me, that ends up, I've just, if you take all the time you spend on phone calls, I've been able to basically cut that at least in half and maybe by 2/3. And for me, that's been a huge productivity boon, particularly when I'm traveling, like I'm in Europe right now as we speak. So I only have a couple hours of overlap, but that way, as people have issues arise throughout the day, they can send me the messages. I get up in the morning, they're all queued up. I go through them, I respond. So it works really well for asynchronous work, particularly when you're not in the same time zone.
I love it. I love that technology, and I'm going to use that and steal that strategy on the meeting thing. That's brilliant. It's one of the things that I think we could definitely tighten up. And I'm definitely the same way in regards to my phone is always on silent, and I only have scheduled times throughout the day that I'll look at it when I'm not doing anything that's taking my focus away from it. So that's great. What's a favorite quote that you've used that has helped you as an entrepreneur and be able to make some of these better decisions?
Failure, the greatest teacher, is from the master Yoda. I actually just got off a phone call with some of my team, and it's a firefighting phone call. They've got an issue we're dealing with, and I just reminded the team at the end. I was like, "Hey, guys, this is what makes us stronger." And anytime as we get bigger, my biggest fear is we don't fail enough, because that means we're not trying hard enough, right? If you're not falling down, you're not skiing hard enough. And as you get bigger, there gets to be so much risk avoidance in a larger organization. I find myself really pushing people to take more risks. And as a leader, you've got to make it. Then we need to celebrate failures. And when obviously you want to fail fast. You want to identify failures early in the process so things don't. You don't want these big failures where you're too big to fail in any project. But for me, that's been a quote that just continues to remind me: you need to take risks. And you need to accept and make it comfortable for people to also take risks. And you don't want them to feel punished or down when they fail, as long as they're failing in a way that wasn't stupid, that they had a reasonable thing they were testing. It was risky. And if they learn from it, that makes the organization stronger.
And what's a favorite book that's helped you as an entrepreneur?
So I would say on the basics, Jim Collins' Good to Great. I mean, it's just so foundational about how to, really focus in on what it is that differentiates your company and what is your unique competitive advantage. We have a book club at Axon, and we've probably read that 2 or 3 times over the past 20 years. And every time it's just, getting the basics right is hard. The basics are never that complex, but applying them rigorously to your business, it is. And it's hard. And so I've just found that one continually is always helpful.
And what's the next thing for you right now on your vision or dream board?
So I just wrote this book called The End of Killing, which for us is a manifesto where we're actually laying the marker down and saying we are going to outperform the police pistol by 2030. In the next 10 years, non-lethal weapons will not just be good, but they'll actually be more effective and faster than killing somebody. And that's going to be a game changer, because historically, right, we tend to think of the use of force that you start, at the low end of the injury spectrum and you work your way up, right? So in a low risk scenario, you might try pepper spray. In a mid risk scenario, you might try a taser. But if some guy's coming at you with a knife, you're going to deploy lethal force. But that's because the effectiveness of these technologies have always been kind of related to how much injury they cause. When we get to the point where we have energy weapons that don't kill you and don't leave a long-term injury, but actually are more reliable than a gun, that's going to be a game changer, because all of a sudden this whole idea of killing in self-defense becomes obsolete. And so that's where we're focused over the next 10 years. And I will tell you, it was a little bit risky for me to write the book and get out with this message, because as you can imagine, we have to be very careful with police officers to say, look, the taser, historically, you don't take a taser weapon to a gunfight, but we actually see daylight. We can see a vision to where you actually would do that. And it's not just because you want to be kind to the person on the receiving end, but we actually think that energy weapons will be a faster, more effective tool that will better protect you and avoids having to take somebody's life, which carries all sorts of awful consequences with it. So that's where we're focused. And then, of course, on the other side of the business, we have built the largest cloud data set anywhere in government in the world. We're over 60 million gigabytes of data now, so 60 petabytes of police audio and video data. So we have cameras, almost 400,000 cameras now on every cop, from the London police to Los Angeles and New York and Chicago. And so what we'll be doing on that side of the business now is lighting up. We've made major investments in artificial intelligence to unlock all of the insights and value that are in that massive data set for our customers. And we believe that we'll be able to fundamentally automate the entire information flow of policing. So a lot of people don't realize today, cops spend about half of their day as a data entry clerk, typing up reports. Well, we're already recording these incidents on an audio video camera. If you start to think of that more as an intelligent sensor where we can transcribe the reports, our goal is in another 10 years, around the same time that we're making the bullet obsolete, we're also going to make the keyboard obsolete. So police officers can be cops all day, and our technology will record the incidents and extract all of the names, locations, and dates and things that you need and auto-populate the report for them. And if we can do those two big things, we'll have effectively doubled the world's police force and given them the tools so that they don't have to kill anybody anymore. And I think it'll be a good day if we can look back and say we accomplished that over the next decade.
Well, Rick, I want to thank you so much for taking some time. I know you're on a trip, have taken some time out of your busy schedule where you are right now to be with us here today. How can the listeners reach out to you if they want to contact you further?
Yeah, best way to do it. So my website is just endofkilling.com. So if you go to endofkilling.com, there's a link there. There's obviously some information about the book I just released. And that'd be the best way. And you can also obviously see some more videos and stuff talking about a little more specifics of how we believe that we can bring to an end the practice of people killing each other, which sounds radical, but if you actually dig into the numbers, this is a trend that's been happening for hundreds of years. The rate of homicide in the world is down by over 99%. You wouldn't believe that because the way, the news tends to amplify when bad things happen, but we're well on our way to living in a world where it's just not acceptable to kill anyone anymore. And the one remaining use case is self-defense. And we think we can solve that with better tech.
Well, Rick, again, thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to continue to follow you as you continue to grow and as an entrepreneur. And we'll make sure we have all those links in our show notes. And thank you again so much. Look forward to having you on a future episode as you continue to grow.
Been fantastic. Thanks. And au revoir from Paris.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.